Good morning, everyone. Aware of the fact that I'm the first one to present and the fact I've seen a couple of yawns already, I'm not going to overload you with technical information, rather just a thoughtful talk on the decisions made to drop the bomb 70 years ago. Now, that decision took influence from a lot of factors, and one factor often overlooked is the influence from the physicists themselves, the guys who brought us into the age of the atom. So with this talk, I want to prompt thought on the question of why someone would work on weapons of mass destruction, and also maybe answer the question of how we should remember these physicists 70 years on. The key scientific figure behind the Manhattan Project, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, said that the physicists have known sin. So is perhaps this a way that we should remember them? People perhaps attempting to open Pandora's box and unveil what secrets it may hold? Or as people simply caught in the struggle between scientific revolution and war? Whatever the influence from these people, it would go on to save the nuclear world as you and I see it today. So to set the scene, it was in the 1920s that the atom was unveiling its secrets to the likes of Einstein, Rutherford and Bohr. And these secrets in 1938 would lead to the startling discovery of fission, a discovery that would immediately revolutionize nuclear physics. And parallel to this discovery, there was a war raging on across the Atlantic. And on the day after the attacks of Pearl Harbor, the US joined it by declaring war on Japan and Germany. Now at this time, it was feared that Germany were already underway with their own atomic bomb project, even before Einstein had told Roosevelt that such a thing was possible. And so a race began, a race to build the bomb. General Leslie Groves appointed Oppenheimer as director of the Manhattan Project, and in turn Oppenheimer assembled venerated experts in the fields of science and mathematics. Los Alamos started as a few families handpicked by Oppenheimer, and soon it would go on to be a walled city of over 6,000 people. Never before was there such an assembly of great intellect focused on one task, and that one task was to produce a practical military weapon in the form of a bomb from which the energy was released by a fast neutron chain reaction. A task that many people thought was just. It was to end the war as soon as possible. So fast forward a few years to the arrival of the E-Day, and it was found that the German atomic bomb project hadn't even gained momentum. So with no longer another dangerous competitor in the race, would this have been a good time to stop work on the Manhattan Project? Physicist Robert Wilson questioned that with Germany out of the picture, perhaps what they were doing was morally wrong, and he would go on to set up a meeting to discuss the impact of their work on civilization. Oppenheimer's input to this meeting was that wouldn't it be better that the world knew about the possibility of an atomic bomb rather than it be kept a secret, especially during the crucial time in which the UN was being formed. All agreed with Oppenheimer and continued work towards a demonstration so that the UN was formed with the awareness of this horrible thing to come. Now, at the start of the project, there was barely enough plutonium in the world to cover the head of a pin. And by early summer of 1945, about 10 pounds of it arrived at Los Alamos, minus the price tag of roughly $1 billion, which, to the useful tool of Google, it translates to about 13 billion in nowadays money. So preparations were beginning for a test. And no one truly knew what to expect from the outcome of this test. There was even serious talk had on the possibility of the explosion igniting the atmosphere and destroying the planet. A scary thought, but speculation aside, it was on the morning of July 16th, 1945, that the world experienced its first nuclear explosion in Trinity. Now, seeing the inferno of Trinity literally dwarf the mountain ranges surrounding it, it would bring a chill to anyone's spine. And it did so with the physicists. Expressing his fear, Oppenheimer said that we knew the world would not be the same, and he was very correct when he said this. So the task was complete, the task that had been set out in the start. The bomb had been made, and next on the national agenda was to win the war. But somewhere between those two events, this weapon would have to be deployed and create a truly horrific experience for the person on the receiving end. So what about perhaps a demonstration, maybe use an uninhabited island to demonstrate this weapon, or invite members of the Japanese government over to witness an explosion? All questions and thoughts raised by the physicists, soon to be shut down by the rhetorical question of Oppenheimer when he said, what if it didn't work? They've only tested one of these things before, and from the safety of a demonstration, the havoc and horrific effects that this thing can cause cannot be truly understood. At the time of the test, Truman was in Potsdam, and it was here that Oppenheimer hoped he would open up to Stalin about the work that had been going on at Los Alamos. Leo Szilard, a Hungarian physicist who drafted the letter that Einstein sent to Roosevelt, would form a petition signed by many well-informed scientists rejecting the idea of use. Niels Bohr, throughout the project's entirety, would warn of a nuclear arms race should these weapons be used. But none of their efforts would affect the outcome, as with war raging on and Japan's silent response to the Potsdam Declaration, the US took this as rejection of their ultimatum and final justification to use a bomb. And on August the 6th, 1945, the city of Hiroshima was destroyed in a matter of seconds by a single bomb. With burns, blindness, and radiation sickness, the death toll was estimated up to 100,000 people. Now, to see the pinnacle of their career's work used to complete the Manhattan Project's mission, it stunned the physicists. There was fulfillment initially that their work was done and it could now influence the war to end, but immediately followed by flooding images of the citizens of Hiroshima and what they just experienced. Upon hearing the news, physicist Hans Bethe said that it should never happen again. But unfortunately it did. The US followed out its plan to cause maximum psychological damage in quick succession, as just 3 days later, Fat Man was dropped over Nagasaki. After months of unprecedented conventional efforts, and now the drop of 2 single bombs, the war came to an end as on August 15th, Japan surrendered. Truman said he never lost any sleep over his decision, a decision that he said saved hundreds of thousands of young American lives. And it's interesting to think, had there not have been a bomb, what would the outcome of the war have been? Today we live in a world where non-proliferation and control of these weapons is priority, but the same cannot be said back then. Oppenheimer would publicly and adamantly go on to argue for the control of these weapons. He wanted to prevent the Air Force from abusing what he'd helped make in order to end the war. And it seemed that there was almost a naivety of the US government in thinking they could maintain a monopoly on these weapons, and it was blinding them from seeing a world after the use. But the monopoly was short-lived, however, as in 1949 the Soviet Union detonated their first nuclear bomb. Tensions grew, nuclear stockpiles grew, and warnings and fears of the physicists came to fruition as a nuclear arms race unfolded. In the late 60s, when asked about President Johnson's planned talks to reduce the spread of nuclear weapons, Oppenheimer simply replied that it was 20 years too late, and it should have been done the day after Trinity. But rather late than never, in the 1970s, the Non-Proliferation Treaty came into force. So, back to what Oppenheimer said. Is this a way that we should remember them? At the time, the scientists were committed to a cause that was backed by an entire nation, and that was to win a war. It's a tragic shame that the evolutionary path that had been laid before them by the likes of Einstein, Rutherford, and Bohr, that they, as scientists, would only naturally follow and further towards the next scientific revolution, would come into a collision course with the militaristic needs to abruptly win a war. And it was only a matter of time before these two paths would inevitably meet. Thank you very much for listening.